Okay, I had committed to making my next upload a Batman video to celebrate the conclusion of The Penguin and reward all you who subscribed thanks to my video on the Batverse and haven't had anything like it to watch on my channel since, but Election Day just happened in the last week, if you somehow didn't know. I mean, I almost forgot about it because I've been that out of touch with politics for a while, but I realized I should have made this video a week ago. Well, better late than never, so let's get into it. I loved Alex Garland's Civil War. The action sequences were riveting, the action was phenomenal, and there were a couple scenes more terrifying and disturbing than anything from any horror movie I think I've ever seen, which probably says more about the lack of horror movies I've seen than anything else. But none of that is what I want to talk about today. See, Civil War is an interesting movie. Not just that the film itself is interesting, but the reaction surrounding it when it came out was complicated, to say the least. As the film prepared to hit theaters, it stirred a fair bit of controversy thanks to its subject matter. But once it released, many viewers felt disappointed, either that it wasn't a more traditional epic war film, or that it didn't seem to have anything to say. And I must say, I can understand why some felt confused that the film chose to tackle such a sensitive theme as American politics, and then seemed too scared to say anything about American politics. However, I feel those who didn't take anything away from this experience didn't bother to look at it more closely than as a political statement. Today, I want to suggest that not everything is about American politics. I mean, Alex Garland is British after all. And maybe that's the point of this movie, to get us to break out of our political lenses and look at the world we're creating more objectively, to step out of the us versus them mentality our nation is stuck in, to look down the road of polarization we're on to its ugly end. But before I get into this review, I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Now without further ado, let's dive into it. When I first saw in the trailers that the movie put California and Texas, of all states, on the same side of this fictional conflict, I was initially skeptical of the whole thing, since in 1,000 alternate realities in which the United States descends into a second civil war, I'd bet money on those two states being on opposite sides in every single one. But I thought about it for a second, and I knew there was no way Alex Garland thought this was a plausible reality, so there must have been a reason he decided to make the alliance between the two states epitomizing the opposing ends of the political spectrum one of the few things we actually learn about this war. And the only reason that came to me was that it was a deliberate choice to keep the sides of the fictional conflict as vague as possible. This movie makes absolutely no references to political parties throughout its runtime, so it's clear that was the director's goal. Before the movie dropped, I saw a frightening amount of people on social media saying the horrible future this film depicts is what America needs, and many more reasonably anxious that this film would only stir those kinds of people to further anger and polarization upon its release. However, once the film was released, it was clear that was the furthest thing from the director's intention. But then, what was his intention? I've seen plenty of reviewers say this is a movie that doesn't have anything to add to the argument, or that it's too scared to take a stance, but I think they're totally missing the point. This is a movie about polarization, and where it leads. It is not about good guys versus bad guys, or even right versus left. It is simply about violence. And if the story had been about Republicans versus Democrats, audiences would likely have just taken sides and seen it as a political statement one way or the other, and it may have unintentionally had the opposite effect of that which it intended, only further stirring up zealous ideological fervor. That's the last thing the filmmakers wanted, so they went out of their way to avoid that. I'll admit, when I first saw the film, I was not exactly disappointed, but I don't know. I expected to learn more about this world. I wanted to understand the war and why it was being fought. I wanted to be able to get invested in a side and know why the conflict we were watching mattered. I wasn't initially sure how to feel about the movie because it certainly didn't satisfy those expectations. But I couldn't deny that the film had gripped me like few other movies have. It was a truly haunting experience, and I thought about it a lot for a while afterward. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the details of the war didn't matter because we weren't supposed to be invested in the war itself. We were just supposed to be horrified by it. This story could have been set in Africa, in Afghanistan, in Poland, or Israel, it wouldn't matter because it's not a movie about politics. It's a movie about war. And while the political forces behind wars may vary, on the ground level for the everyday people affected by it, war looks the same wherever it's fought and whatever it's fought over. It doesn't matter what the issue of the day is. It's the same across the world and throughout history, and it's always horrible. In fact, I don't think this is a story about us as a country at all. Well, not us specifically, that is. People assumed that it was trying to make a statement about American politics because of its setting, and that if it didn't do so, then it failed. But I think its message is far more universal than that. I believe the setting of modern America was only used to make the very real horror of senseless violence and destruction, still rampant in many parts of the world, feel real and hit closer to home to those of us so sheltered in the comfort of the modern Western world that we can ignore this plague still raging across the world outside. I think the story's focus on war journalists was telling of the filmmaker's intention. It could have been focused on soldiers, politicians, or even civilians, but it didn't. Just like its protagonists, the narrative tries not to get involved, not to take sides, merely to record. Merely to show the world the intimate and individual horrors of war, to paint a haunting and visceral picture of the worst humanity is capable of. Ultimately, this isn't a film meant to transport us into another world, invest us in an epic conflict, or explore the journeys of relatable characters, though I did love the incredibly well-developed and well-acted cast. Just as journalists in war-torn countries do their best to force us at home to look at a reality we don't want to see, we don't want to acknowledge, in the hopes of inspiring us to act, this film impartially shows us the unpleasant reality of war as it might look on our doorstep, forcing us to confront the truth that this could happen to us. This could happen here and now. This violence is already a reality to so much of the world, and the only thing stopping it from becoming our reality today is us. These words from the film's protagonist still haunt me, and I plead, that they are not words Alex Garland finds himself saying in our near future. This wasn't the movie I expected it to be, but I believe it's the kind of movie America needs to wake us up and remind us how easy it would be for the world we know to fall apart, for our war of words to turn into a bloodbath. And instead of making some pretentious statement about politics or creating a scenario either side could turn into propaganda, the movie zooms in on how the horrors of war affect the lives of everyday people, and it asks us, is this what we want? It's easy to dismiss the violence in other parts of the world and think that could never happen here. We would never be part of such atrocities. But when the film takes the violence we see in the news and puts it in our own neighborhoods, it challenges us to face the ugly reality of our own tribalistic nature and ask ourselves if we would stoop to these levels of depravity if this happened here. The movie is careful not to glorify any of the violence we see. It is brutal and horrifying, yet it's presented in such a way that it feels frighteningly plausible. Will our country descend into civil war soon? I don't know. I hope and pray not, and I am optimistic, but I also know that it is more possible than we may think, and I hope each of us seriously asks ourselves if we would allow ourselves to be a part of such a future, because the only way we can avoid it is if we each make the choice now that we won't. I know this is a much more serious video than most of mine, so I hope it wasn't a turn-off for my subscribers. Honestly, this is why I love movies, because they can be so powerful and spark such deep and relevant conversations. We need movies like this, and it's movies like this that make me love doing what I do here on this channel. But anyway, what did you think of Alex Garland's Civil War and its message? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I hope to join you down there, and until next time, never stay silent.